With season 2 right around the corner, I want to look back at what is still one of the most expensive seasons of television ever and ask the obvious question, was the massive price tag worth it? Welcome to Sandwich Reviews. I'm the Talking Sentient Sandwich, and despite its many flaws, I think Amazon's The Rings of Power show is pretty great at times. And right out of the gate, I'll give you a spoiler warning because you've either already watched it or you don't care. So starting off, I wanted to talk about how this show does a phenomenal job at gripping the audience. First with some great dialogue between Galadriel and her brother, but then with some of the most gorgeous cinematic shots of all time. I wish that opening battle was more than just 5 seconds, but it was still an exceptional opening. And the music done by God of War composer Bear McCreary makes the sweeping shots of action or beautiful vistas that much more epic. It's not quite on the level of the original trilogy, but nothing was ever going to match the nostalgic highs those movies reach. And naturally, like any other fandom, many diehard fans had already dismissed the show before it had even started. Though in this particular case, I can't really blame them. The only reason this show was allowed to exist is because it's set in a vague time period somewhere in the second age of Middle-earth, picking and choosing stories that Amazon is legally able to tell, which still doesn't make any sense because Sauron and Gandalf don't arrive in Middle-earth until the Third Age. But if I wasn't already aware of that, I doubt it would ever be noticed. The show does dip into boring territory for long portions, but the characters' dynamics and the cool action kept me from thinking too hard about all the behind-the-scenes legal drama. And of all the characters that I liked, I thought Galadriel was a great focus protagonist, being the person who allows Sauron to rise to power. She's very angry, and I know she's got a lot of character work to go through before she's the Galadriel we know, but she's still awesome to see, even if a lot of the human people around her are infinitely less interesting. Elrond was mainly there to set up Celebrimbor to forge the rings, but I enjoyed him as well. By the way, Celebrimbor being teased like a Marvel post-credit scene was awesome, and the reverence he was given every time he was on screen was just amazing. I'd just freak out and think, I know where they're going with this. Though I'm pretty sure everyone and their grandma knew, the show still did a good job of making the viewer feel like they were in on the fun. But to lead to that, Elrond had to retrieve a new magical ore, Mithril, from the dwarven mines of Moria. And let me tell you, every time Elrond was negotiating with his old buddy Durin, I was entirely entertained. Maybe too much time is spent going back and forth, but the political drama of Elrond needing to ask Durin for help even though he made a vow not to is more interesting than nothing. Besides, whenever they sat down with Durin's wife, Disa, and their kids, I just had the biggest grin on my face. Not that this show is as harrowing as Game of Thrones, but it's still nice to see a healthy family. Arondir was another pivotal character as well, and he was given plenty of screen time, but that was simply there to expand the world, which to be clear is not a bad thing. It may seem pointless and derivative, but it was well written and much needed. And I'll talk about how much I enjoyed that storyline coming together with everything else later on. Plus, with either Arondir or Galadriel, you just knew there was going to be some amazing action, and the show really delivers on that front. Theo, the little kid Arondir pretty much adopted, came off more annoying than what was probably planned, yet there were moments where I didn't hate him, and like everything else, it tied together with the rest of the story and set up something more at least once. The antagonists in Season 1 of Ring of Power come off as muddled, but I do think that was the plan. I'm not sure if it was the right choice, but it's clear that's the direction the writers chose to go in. The weird magical people Gandalf fights, Gandalf himself, and even some of the elves are all just there to draw suspicion away from Halbrand, but there being so many villains meant to at one point be considered Sauron only complicates the narrative. It would make sense if they were him taking different forms, but it's not. I figured that was a bigger problem, but upon a rewatch, I realized that still kind of works because Adar, the orc leader, was there to give the audience a tangible antagonist to root against, and his distraction from the real villain was what actually worked about his character. His story doesn't go anywhere, but that was the point. Nonetheless, it depicted the accurate lore of orcs coming from elves, something 99% of us already know, but it's still a concept that's incredible to see utilized for Adar's motivation. But I think my favorite aspect of rewatching this season of the show is analyzing a lot of Halbrand's dialogue and small maneuvering. The first time he's in a combat situation, it's revealed how vicious and bloodthirsty he is, but more than that, every small glance and gesture is layered with as much foreshadowing as the writers could pack in. That may make it obvious and easy to guess for some, and I did consider it early on when I was watching it week to week, getting more sure as the episodes went on. But like any great mystery, the reader or audience should be able to accurately guess the answer before it's revealed. But even if you put that aside, the plot still doesn't come together until episode 6, which is a flaw that cannot be ignored. And that's not even true for Gandalf and the Harfoots, a storyline that never connects to the rest of the show, at least for now. There is plenty of entertainment to be taken from the Harfoot society and their Karens, and Eleanor is a typical fantasy archetype, just wanting to go out on a great big adventure, but that all worked for me, especially as I watched it for the second time, knowing where it was heading, rightfully getting bummed out when Sadok was killed. But back to the storylines coming together in episode 6, because that was simply fantastic to watch. Galadriel's, Arondir's, and all of the humans' plotlines coming to a head was an experience like nothing else. And to have that immediately followed up by the volcanic eruption of Mount Doom made this show an all-timer for me, just for those 20 or so minutes alone. There were plenty of other jaw-dropping visuals, like the opening I mentioned, and an epic glimpse at the Balrog, but Mount Doom's eruption was really the highlight for me. Even before it erupted, I kept looking at that particular mountain and wondering how it was going to eventually make the Southlands into Mordor. And all that is there to set up Halbrand stepping back into his role as Sauron the leader. Adar claims at one point to have killed Sauron, but no one believed that, certainly not Galadriel. But unfortunately, by the time the narrative got to the interesting stuff, most people had already tuned out. I did enjoy watching the first season of Rings and Power, even when it first came out, but it's a problem I can't argue with. I appreciate everything that was done with the rings, and of course, their creation is very important, that being the title of the series, but to me, this whole first season, and presumably the show in general, is about the rise of Sauron. I would have enjoyed seeing Morgoth more, but it's not like what we got was bad. And if you look at Sauron's plotline in a vacuum, and see everything else as periphery, it's fantastic. Every new character and story that unfolds with them is there only to flesh out the world or the series of events that leads to Sauron's power. And it's on that note, revealing the villain fully and setting him off on his actual journey, I can't wait to see what Season 2 has in store. So if you've somehow gotten to the end of this video without having seen it, or watched a few episodes and stopped, deciding to just write it off, check out Season 1 of The Rings of Power, even though I just spoiled the whole thing for you, because it's a guaranteed fun watch for the majority of its runtime. And before I conclude, I gotta ask, how are they gonna set up the 9 ring wraiths? Of all the things that needs to be done well, that's at the top of my list. But those are my thoughts on Season 1 of The Rings of Power. Did you enjoy it as much as I did, or perhaps had a worse time with it? Are you excited for Season 2? Let me know down in the comments, and as always, thanks for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe for weekly video essays and reviews, and enjoy a delicious sandwich.